Hello, welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast. I'm Zach. I'm here with Jake, and we're here to talk about Mike Mills' newest film, Come On, Come On. It's a film that is my favorite film of the year. Jake, I think it's your favorite film of the year.
Pretty steadfastly.
The last time that we talked, you were quite looking forward to seeing it, and I'd love to hear about your experience. Paint me a picture. Tell me what that was like.
It's a journey of many layers. So I've been aware that this movie was happening since like the beginning of this year, I think, just because it's like, Mike Mills hasn't made like a whole lot of things, and he's really, really risen off of the acclaim of the work he did with The National, with I Am Easy to Find, and 20th Century Women. So now he's like on people's radars, like a mainstream, more indie darling kind of dude. And so yeah, I just knew that he was making a movie and it had Joaquin Phoenix in it. And I was like, okay, I'm sold. And then, months pass, I kind of forget about it because nobody talks about it. And then all of a sudden, it's in theaters and places, and you 5-star that shit.
It is my first 5-star movie of 2020 or 2021, first since 2019. Like the last new release that I 5-star was Greta Gerwig's Little Women. And a movie that made me cry almost as much as this does.
I was going to say, this is the movie, like, Greta Gerwig's Little Women is my favorite movie of the 2010s, and I like this movie about almost as much as that, but I didn't expect to, I guess I didn't have any expectations other than, of course, Mills definitely has a certain sensibility with the way he, shoots everything, the way he writes everything. It's like, it's distinctly very him, but he hasn't made enough movies to really like isolate what that is yet. So I was just like, I just want to see what he does. And then once you 5-starred it, I was just like, okay, I'm really going to give this movie the attention that it deserves from me. Like, I want to be able to give this my all, because I know, if anything, that even if we don't agree on everything, if you 5-star something, I want to know why you did that, because that's important. And then I watched it, and I went to see it in theaters on my birthday. I took my girlfriend, Rhiannon, viewers of the Jams and Tea podcast, real ones remember. We went to see it, and she had like basically no context for it. She hasn't seen any like Mills stuff. I know she's like semi-aware of The National, which, kind of plays into this because Bryce and Aaron did the soundtrack. But we left, and just like with The Green Knight, immediately what happened is that we just kind of got in the car, we were quiet for a little while, and then we just kind of started talking about it. And then I went home, birthday, it was nice. And then every waking moment I've had since, I've been thinking about Come On, Come On. Even after I reviewed it and gave it a really lengthy review, it's just been on my mind, and I can't really get it out. Even if I like tried to be like, oh, I need to find a new hyperfixation or else I'm going to fucking die. I couldn't do it, just because this is like, even though there are some real heavy hitters I haven't seen this year, and I always bite myself in the ass by saying like, oh, this is going to be my favorite thing of the year, because then something else comes along and squashes it. I thought that about The Green Knight, but if there's another movie in 2021 that I like more, than I quit. Fuck you. Like, it's genuinely absurd, and I don't really have like an in on it, just because like, trying to explain A, why this movie is so emotionally affecting, and B, why it resonates with people like the two of us without just really getting into the weeds of it.
I agree. I have found it thus far, whether in conversation or in writing, to be somewhat difficult to articulate what this movie made me feel and why. Oftentimes when talking about a movie, you can isolate things into technical elements, into storytelling elements, into character elements, and kind of get a picture of what's working about it. But this is quite unique, at least in my opinion, and these are things which we'll unpack. For me, I had only seen Mike Mills' I Am Easy to Find prior to seeing this film in theaters, and I didn't know that was Mike Mills. I understood that when I went to see Come On, Come On, I became aware of this movie via seeing the trailer for it a small handful of times. I was aware that it was an A24 film. I was aware that the director was Mike Mills, who, as you said, hasn't made a whole lot yet, but the main things that I knew him from were Beginners, which I have not seen, and 20th Century Women, which after seeing this movie, you and I actually watched 20th Century Women together. You're a huge fan of that movie. Lots of people I know are huge fans of that.
Yes.
And so really my basis for it was, all right, there's this movie 20th Century Women. I've been sleeping on it forever. People say that it's good. Joaquin Phoenix is probably going to give an awards buzzworthy performance. So I should definitely see this to be kind of in the know. Is he doing great? I love Joaquin Phoenix.
Me too.
I will watch that man do anything. I feel like I've gone through the ringer watching, Joker or whatever else for the guy.
I was just going to say that's a testament to our love, is that we will sit through some fucking clunkers for this man.
Absolutely. And so that was where my intrigue came from. To rewind the clock a little bit, and just for viewers of this podcast who have made it this far, this is not going to be a spoiler discussion per se, but at the same time, this is probably a discussion that's going to be a little bit better if you've seen the movie, because of the way that we're going to unpack it. Come On is a unique movie because it's not distinctly plotted. There aren't a number of plot events that we can sit here and spoil for you the way that you can spoil most traditional movies. But that also sort of means that talking about it requires unpacking a lot of ideas that are nice to not necessarily have bouncing around in your head. And that's one of the other things that I've maybe found a little bit hard to articulate about it, is that I find it difficult to talk about in a spoiler-free way. So for those of you listening to this conversation, do be aware we're going to do our best to unpack parts of this movie that, happen 2/3 and final scene, things of that nature. This will be a little bit more spoiler-ish. So, Come On. What is it? It's a new indie drama, docu-fiction, kind of hybrid genre experiment from Mike Mills. As we've already said, it's an A24 film. And the plot of it follows a character played by Joaquin Phoenix, who is a podcaster. And he lives in New York City. And one day he gets a surprise phone call from his sister, with whom he hasn't been speaking very much. His sister is an adult, and she has a young son, played by Woody Norman, who is, this is his acting debut, first film he's ever been in. And their family, which is the woman is played by Gabby Hoffman. She has a husband, ex-husband. I don't really remember exactly the marital status, but they are separated, played by the actor Scoot McNairy, who you may remember from his smaller turns in he's in Narcos, he's in Gone Girl, he's in Batman versus Superman, he's in the Ben Affleck movie Argo. What I'm trying to build the case for here is like Scoot McNairy is not like a dude that has ever really impressed me until I saw him in this. Scoot McNairy plays the emotionally unstable father of the Woody Norman character. And what transpires in the film is that the mother and the father, as two people, have to address his emotional issues, which forces the Woody character to stay with Joaquin Phoenix for a period of time. And thus the plot, such as it is about an uncle who is stepping back into an active role within his sister's life by taking care of her young child. And so right off the bat, right from scene one, moment one, this was a really interesting plot setup that made me feel very seen as a single adult man, because it's about, from the onset, what it's like to have to be a parent for someone that has never been a parent, to be immediately thrust into the kind of surrogate parent role, to be a mentor for a young person, and to begin to explore what I find to be thus like the most cogent through line of all of Mike Mills' work, is that everyone, including children, perhaps especially children, are three-dimensional people. They are people with qualities that have emotional reactions to things. And so what the movie is about is something that, interestingly, was always a really big frustration for me when I was a young person, which was not being seen as a person, but as an object on a schedule or someone that had to be told to go somewhere. And so this film really uniquely kind of made me feel quite seen by both the Woody Norman child character and the Joaquin Phoenix adult character, and their interior and exterior complexities. And that's a lot of things that I just said, Jake. So what I want to do is sort of pass it off to you and kind of focus on that theme and that recurring motif of dimensionality. When the mother speaks of her kid in this film, because she's constantly on the phone with Joaquin Phoenix, it's like, this kid is driving me nuts. Help, what do I do? And almost every time that she responds, it's about, you have to understand that this is a person. And just like every other person in your life, whether they're an adult or they're a kid, you can't control them. You can't hold them in your grasp. So any thoughts on any of that?
I mean, truth be told, my experience really isn't all that different from yours, and that just basically every like aspect that this movie tackles and every like relationship dynamic and theme is something that I either have felt for a long time or am feeling like through the sort of cipher of this sort of family unit. You have a single mother who's raising her son, who is very heavily implied to be either on the spectrum, have a sensory processing disorder. He's somebody who's a bit ahead of the curve, but is behind the curve socially. So Joaquin has to it's not just like taking care of a kid, it's taking care of this kid. And he has to learn to engage, like you said, engage with them. And Mills could run into the trapping of being like a new agey parent philosophy person that's just basically comes at this angle from like a completely unrelatable standpoint. But it's like, no, what he's doing, I think, is very firmly rooting these characters and being really either understanding or wanting to understand and engage with children, which is a very big theme of the documentary part of the movie, But in isolation, this is a movie about a mother, a very hardworking single mother who raises her son who's on spectrum. And I have spent most of my life being that kid. And I have watched as my mom has done this and progressed throughout her life as well. And Mike Mills shouting it out to the single ladies. Thank you. We do appreciate it.
And the single fellas.
And the single fellas. That was another thing too, is that Joaquin's character, he's older, he sort of has like his little niche job in his existence, and he's very content within it. There's definitely not things aren't perfect. He still has his unresolved issues with his sister. He has some stuff that happened to him in the past, and he's worried about a couple of things, and he's struggling, but in a way that most people struggle. And I just sort of thought that oh, this is going to be the character that Joaquin will explore, and I'll follow them through him. And I didn't expect to relate to him as much as I did, just because it's that Greta Gerwig line in 20th Century Women, sort of that embodied whatever your life's going to be, it's going to be nothing like what you expect. Yeah. That's basically where he is, and he arrives at a very it's a fundamentally not particularly exciting existence, but he's content because he loves what he does. And as somebody who's gotten older, and somebody who's I'm officially now in my mid-20s, so seeing this on my birthday was a bit but as somebody who's found a passion for something that's very similar to what Joaquin does, and is really driven by that, and doesn't really have a whole lot of peripheral interests, it was I did feel kind of weirdly represented by this guy, because I'm that's going to be me in 20 years. And I mean, not to mention the fact that you also have Scoot McNairy, who's literally in maybe 5 scenes, and he's in all those 5 scenes for a minute, and it's one of the most accurate physical portrayals of a manic bipolar spiral. I
was going to say, it's either bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder. It's a bit hard to tell. In those scenes, what you get in the movie utilizes a unique structure. I wouldn't call it non-linear. It progresses chronologically throughout the kind of family drama that is unfolding. However, it utilizes a lot of flashbacks, and that's kind of what you see in the Scoot McNairy. You're sort of glimpsing it through memory, or you're glimpsing it through someone referencing it on a phone call. And so a lot of those scenes where he's in don't even have any audio. We should talk about the sound mix. This is one element of it where without, it's just, it'll generally be that Dessner's score, and that will be playing over a scene of Scoot McNairy just kind of, as you say, physically acting things out. And there's a lot of detail in the performance there. There's clearly a lot of psychological understanding that is going into these characters. And I like that you mentioned that the child character in this, Jesse, is, at least in the perception of these two people talking about the film, on the spectrum in some way. This is not confirmed as like a detail of his character by any means. When I first started watching it, it's very clear that he's precocious and that he has a strong level of emotional intelligence and a strong level of independence as given to him by his single mother. This is another thing that 20th century women kind of explores, is like how these non-traditional family structures can open up your mind as a child to all new types of, maturity and experiences. There's that great scene in 20th Century Women. I know I'm getting a little off topic of come on. There's a great scene in 20th Century Women where the two kids are talking on the half pipe, and he kind of puts down this other kid, and it's sort of like, that kid was raised by women, and this kid was raised by like a knucklehead, right?
Yes.
And that's sort of where this starts. But as you kind of go along, you realize that there's, he has like hyperactivity. You realize that there's like sensory overload, things that happen, that there's a really high level of anxiety, all of which is sort of kind of emanating. The film is really kind of rooted from the perspective of the Phoenix character, where as things are going on, you're thinking about how it relates to his work schedule and how it's a story that takes place in Los Angeles and then eventually migrates to New York, where Phoenix lives, sister in LA, he's in New York. Independent New York filmmakers love the New York LA dynamic, word to Noah Baumbach.
Well, hey, I mean, it's notable that you mentioned Baumbach, though, because the cinematographer of this film shot the Meyerowitz stories. So there is a connection there.
Did they also shoot? Do you have that in front of you? Because I think that they also shot The Favorite.
They did, in fact. The cinematographer is Robbie Ryan, who shot Marriage Story, The Favorite, the Meyerowitz stories, and American Honey. Which the notable thing about that to me is that if like excluding The Favorite, because I really think that the cinematography is outstanding in that movie, but I think the cinematography is the way it is in that movie because Yorgos Lanthimos wanted it that way. However, like the through line with his other like really impressive works, also a slow cinema Western called Slow West, which is pretty good, and falls into my comparison here, is that this is a movie that follows in line with like this cinematographer is really good at capturing organic reality. Like there's no real like separation or something that's like inherently super like stylized or in like incredibly like of film. Like this feels like a black and white documentary at times. Like the framing is very purposeful. There's a lot of really intentional choices that are going into this, and the technical work all around I think is
subtle
outstanding.
Choices of camera work as well, subtle push-ins,
yes,
subtle pans, things that convey information. I will say there are moments where it becomes more visually artful, particularly. So Joaquin Phoenix's character is a podcaster. And so many elements of the film are engaged with him in the recording of his own podcast. And thus that's kind of the experimental docufiction break that we were talking about, where it will kind of stop doing family drama scenes to kind of give you a slice of the podcast that he's making that happens to be very much rooted in his life. And that's a dynamic that I know that you and I both really greatly enjoy, whether we're talking about Little Women, his delivery service. We love movies about creation, and we love movies about creators who incorporate their own lives into their creations, word to Charlie Kaufman. But it's a really profound thing, because it's what this person does via the podcast is try to, communicate ideas about the world to people. And he is allowing himself to be informed by his own experiences, and thus by the experiences of this child in his life, which reinforces a kind of non-traditional learning structure, which is reflected in his podcast, where he meets kids, where kids are full people, whether they're on the spectrum, whether they have an emotional disorder, whether they're just regular ass kids. They can teach you so much and open you up to new experiences and new emotions, which is a huge part of the podcast element, which relates into a documentary style, and then the story. And during that documentary stuff, during the moments where you're getting podcast heavy, you actually get a lot of kind of two-dimensional transpositions of cityscapes. Like when you're in New Orleans, you get this like beautiful kind of like montage of different shots where it'll just be, neighborhoods. When you're in New York City, you see that, of course, because it'll just be kind of these rooftops layered on top of each other. And so it will break you out of a lot of the more naturalistic elements and take you into a place that's more visually expressive and defined by abstract shapes, like taking natural forms and making them into abstract shapes, which is something that is in 20th Century Women as well, where he has kind of found footage that is spliced into all the drama. Something that I love about 20th Century Women that gets reincorporated here is the usage of people reading published materials.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's really, it's something that it's like, it gives you kind of like a reference point to what to be thinking about, but it's also sort of what moves these characters. Like, what are these characters particularly interested in intellectually, emotionally? Because it reflects that while this movie, one of the things maybe that's difficult to talk about this movie is the narrative. Most movies kind of have like a conflict. This movie has as many conflicts as it has characters.
Yeah.
Have days of the week, because it's conflict after conflict after conflict after conflict after conflict. There is this one driving one about like the mother and the father and what they're going through. But even as we examine that, we realize that that one conflict is just kind of a series of different conflicts that come up over and over and over again. And so the movie is really about, it's accepting people as the three-dimensional people that they are. It's accepting the conflicts that come into your life in the organic way that they do, and allowing both of those things to change you every day that you're alive. And I find that to be profoundly emotional, much more so than, just like, here's a well-plotted mystery. I love a well-plotted mystery, but
of course,
the way that this movie somewhat recognizes specific emotional experiences that I've had, and then speaks to an emotional philosophy that I think is quite profound, is really the source of the way that I felt about it. It was like it cleared this path, and then everyone acts their asses off, and I'm crying in the club.
And that's the thing too, is that Come On, as emotionally evocative as it is, it's like, it's not like a sad movie. One of the things that I really, really like about it is that it's like, in relation to conflict, I would also relate that to the movie's tone, which is just sort of the utilitarian, whatever the tone of the situation is, that is the tone of the movie. It uses reality as a sort of filter to basically do whatever it wants. But the cool thing about it to me is that, like, if I can speak on it on a little bit more of like a visceral level, is that this is this very strange comparison, but I think you will know exactly what I'm talking about, is that for me anyway, there's always like, I come up with lots of ideas of like ideal movie experiences and like hypothetical films that could do something that maybe I would want to make, or that I would want to see, that capture something very specific that I find compelling. And Come On is actually kind of a manifestation of one of those things that I had during a realization while seeing the film in theaters, Weathering with You, which there's a segment in that movie where everything just kind of breaks away from the main conflict, and it's just our lead characters very intimately exploring this city and just kind of existing within it, and then using their established character traits and dilemmas to sort of organically work in conflict. And like, I love the part of that movie. And the only problem is that it lasts for 20 minutes. And I'm like, I want a movie that is nothing but this. And Come On is that. It's him, it's Joaquin Phoenix and the kid, and the some people he comes across. I thought it was just like, I thought I was having a fever dream when Jabuki Young White showed up, and I was just like, wait, what? Okay. But it never loses sight of the two of them, and it's just them going around doing shit. And the visually compelling cinematography and the way it can sort of like, when they do the interviews with the kids, it'll contrast with these like really intimate questions and performances from these kids, and it'll contrast it with the outside world, and you see these big buildings, and it's like, and there's always a distinctly like mournful tone, because all the kids are saying stuff that's like really bleak, because they don't expect
they're being interviewed about what they think the future will be like. That is what that is what Phoenix's podcast in the film is specifically about. He is interviewing children in different cities of America. What do they think the future will be like? With the acknowledgement that we live in an ongoing pandemic, and that global warming is real, and that international conflict is real, and that the state of the environment, the planet, the country, the world is arguably dire in some ways. And so it's how do children reflect that, and I think what it ends up reflecting, particularly when you're looking at Phoenix's character as a single man with no children, that kind of NPR intellectual cynicism of like, do I want to raise a kid in this world? And like, do I want to focus on my own life and what's the future going to be like? And these are the things that it ruminates on. And I think it comes to a lot of not interesting conclusions, but just sort of interesting little notes to ruminate on that really, I left that feeling like I had listened to kids tell me what they thought the future was going to be like. And it really, as someone who went back out into the real world, I thought about that, which is, I think about movies all the time, but thinking about movies in the context of my real life is pretty rare. Something that you mentioned that I think is noteworthy is about how the scenes are generally made up of domestic scenarios that mix and match with tones. And you actually mentioned Jabuki, which is great, because one of the scenes I thought of, there's a moment where Jabuki is watching the Woody Norman character for a period of time while Phoenix is doing something. I believe this is when they're in New Orleans near the end of the movie. And Phoenix comes back and realizes that like something has gone on. And Jabuki's kind of like explaining, oh yeah, the iPad's battery worn out, and he like cried. And you feel that like, for Jabuki, this is kind of like funny, but a little awkward. And for Norman, it's devastatingly awkward and humiliating. And Phoenix is like, it is, and by that time in the movie, he's like, it is. And to me, that is kind of the wisdom of everything that happens. Is like, yeah, sometimes you get mad, sometimes you get upset, sometimes you have a great time, and it is like, that's your life. Like that is
this is a
life.
perfectly reasonable response. Is
And
like that's that
really
culminated moment.
I really love your parallel to the Shinkai film Weathering with You. If I recall correctly, my favorite scene in that movie comes from that same segment, and they're in a hotel room, and the character is so kind of enamored with having to just like be around his loved ones, his friends, and they're experiencing their lives together. And he says like a brief little prayer to the effect of like, please let this be enough for us. Let this hold us together and nourish us, like just being together. And that's like a really powerful moment from Weathering with You. And I really think like that's what Kamakura is. It's like,
yes,
let the love that I have for somebody in emotional turmoil be enough. Let the love that I have for somebody who is running and hiding from their emotional turmoil, as may be the case, be enough to get them to confront the things about themselves that they're not ready to. Or let my company be enough for long enough that they will eventually get there, and let the days in between be filled with wire needle drops and wrestling matches. And toothbrushes that sing songs that are annoying as shit. And it's just a movie that's just like made of details, and every single one of them registered as like not only authentic but really moving to me.
It's geared towards our sensibilities in some respects. Like that's a lot. Like there's no one reason why this is my favorite movie of the year or one of my favorite movies in general now. It's literally everything about it and how it commingles with everything else. I coined like, at least I don't know if this like it probably did exist just because film writing has existed forever, but when I wrote my film like thesis in college, I wrote it on the remake, the Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. And in that review, I called what that movie does prismatic theming, where you take every single part of the movie and you look at it through a specific lens, and that lens shows you a prism of everything else in the movie, and it's constantly rotating and changing so that there's these bubbling dynamics that feel completely fluid throughout the entire movie. Nothing here is static. Every scene advances everything, but it doesn't advance it in a way that makes you feel like it's streamlined or railroaded. It's just simply what naturally evolves from this. It's the perfect line to straddle between like documentary real life filmmaking and a written fictional work, is that it manages to sort of have the appeal of both without really sacrificing one for the other, which is, I think, is impressive in and of itself. But the cool thing about it is just that like, it does speak to the people I feel like that like are alive right now and really want to pursue the things that they love and the things that they're passionate about. because like even though what Joaquin does is like this grand thing, it's this thing that he loves doing and wants to do. It's never like the whole podcast thing, it's never something he like complains about. He's in fact he's incredibly motivated to do it, but he is in a very like normal guy kind of way. And as somebody who's struggling reconciling the fact that the world is fucking falling apart and I'm trying to maintain myself and also survive and keep other people alive and also do my own thing, it's just like this is a movie that perfectly embodies where I am right now in my life and probably where a lot of people our age are. It's just they're just trying to juggle absolutely everything. And Come On doesn't say that that's inherently like tragic or sad. It doesn't condescend or try to impose a tone or theme on it. It just shows you what it is. It's an incredibly like, you see like in the A24 movie that's just like, and you kind of have this preconceived notion of just being like, oh, it's just going to be like this drama or whatever. And it's like, it's so much more complicated than that, but it's also so much more simple, is because I feel like anybody can walk away from that. Like, I feel like I could watch that 7 days out of the week, and each day I would feel completely different after watching it. There are parts of it that just absolutely, that are ruinous. There's a part that I have been thinking about ever since I saw it, is when Joaquin is talking to the kid and he constantly needs to be like put to sleep. He needs to have somebody there with him to read to him or to provide some kind of like stimuli to focus his brain so that he can fall asleep. And he's just talking about his mom. And because Joaquin and the mom character have been separated, there's a lot that they don't know each other, that they don't know about each other. And he just kind of keeps saying all of these things like an awkward kid might, that Joaquin is finding out for the first time. And he casually just drops some really heavy emotional atom bombs on him. And he just kind of like sits there for a moment. He's like, oh my God, I can't believe she didn't tell me this. And then the movie just kind of keeps going. And it's like, that's why it not adhering to a specific mood, tone, or energy is so important, is because it's a perfect simulation of like, you know, the worst thing in the world could have happened to me 2 hours ago and I'm still gonna have to go to work. Like that it feels so raw and honest. And I just love spending time with these characters. It's so like, they're all endearing and complicated and have faults and problems. And like, I'm sure hanging around that kid for enough time would drive me insane. But at the same time, it shows you every facet of these people within its incredibly tight runtime. Like, it's unfathomable how Mills is so maximalist to create something so minimal, which is why it's so fucking enrapturing as an experience.
It feels like every detail has been either rehearsed or written or directed or brought to life via performance. I can't necessarily speak to those blurry lines in the process where, you know, a character goes from an idea in somebody's head to being something that is actualized in front of a camera. But what's really great about it is it feels like it cares, as a piece of writing I'm talking about, as a script, it feels like it cares far more about the individuals as dimensional beings interacting with each other than it ever does about being plotted. It's never trying to set you up for this moment where Phoenix and Hoffman's characters have a big blowout argument over the things that she never told him. It merely exists in the way that it genuinely might. Now, there are big blow up arguments here and there, as there often are in conflicts. But one thing that happens during the film, as I've already mentioned, is it moves from Los Angeles to New York. And that's a big deal. Like, when that happens, it's like a conflict thing that could not have happened within the context of the story. Like the mom character might have said, hey, no, you can't take my kid to New York. And it not only feels plausible that the movie could have gone that way, but it almost feels like what would happen then is that you would watch a movie about Phoenix flying back to New York and just being him for a night, for like the next hour. Like, the kid just left because he had to. And okay, and then he goes back and he does his life, and it would certainly find, as a movie, some way to reflect back on that thing. But it never, a lot of times with movies, they feel predictable because they follow certain designs, because the pieces build to logical conclusions. And that's great. We love plots. All this, just, you know, really plotted scripts can be very strong and very emotional and very potent. But this just abandons that. And I don't mean to suggest that it abandons structure, because I don't think that's true. I think that there's an LA segment, a New York segment, and a New Orleans segment that pretty cleanly split the movie up into three distinct parts. But on a scene by scene basis, it just kind of feels like the movie can roll in any direction that it needs to, just like a nephew and an uncle living in an apartment in New York can roll in any direction that they need to because he's a podcaster. It just kind of feels open-ended the way that a Saturday afternoon with, you know, your younger brother might feel open-ended. Like, hey man, you want to go see a movie? Hey, you want to go to the zoo? Hey, you want to have an existential crisis because you're having a fucking conniption fit on a bus? Great.
It could be so rote, but instead, like, this is a problem I actually had with, like, it's so funny to me that I'm comparing it to several movies that I really, really love specific parts of, and then Mills just decided to make that the movie. But the movie that I have that problem with is Xavier Dolan's film Mommy, which is a film that I think the first two acts of are extraordinary. I loved that movie for those first two acts. I was like, this is going to be a favorite. I fucking love this. And then the third act comes because it's just like, oh, we've hit the second act low point, time to manufacture a conflict and make the movie completely uninteresting, because you had this free-flowing narrative and characters that were interacting with each other with no real like destination in mind other than where logically they would progress as human beings. And instead this external conflict comes in and then renders everything that the characters do completely useless. That never ever happens here. It's just forward momentum. And
You
it
have
really,
a bit
like,
of external conflict vis-a-vis Phoenix having to do these interviews and travel. That is
yes.
as external. And those are the 3/3 of the movie that I was talking about. So there is like an external factor of traveling and being in new places. And then that's it. Like, it doesn't have all these different little contrived things where it's like, oh, this really kooky, stupid misunderstanding of language. It's like, no, they just interact like people. And usually when they're fighting, it's because like one of them is just like in a bad mood. Like, that is maybe one of the most emotionally incisive things in the entire film. Is that
yes.
Half the time that people are fighting, it is not that they are fighting about something that they disagree about. It's that they found some shit to disagree about because they were feeling like they wanted to fight, which is just like, yeah, that's everyone I've ever met in my whole life, because I think that's the human condition. Damn, did they just spell out the human condition? And that's what a lot of the movies like a little bit. Like, at least to me, I don't, I realize that sometimes making certain comparisons can be lofty and like saying certain things are lofty, but I just found that it didn't come across like, some Twitter mental health goofball thread. It just
again,
felt
new
like,
agey bullshit.
No, it didn't even really feel like it had these like cones to lay on you about like how things are. It just sort of, I really think that it just looks at these characters and by extension out into you and the audience and out into people in the world and says like, everybody's their own person. Everybody has their own emotional states. Everybody has the things that they value in their lives and the places they come from and the people that they know. And that's what makes them who they are. And like, then what? And that's kind of the question that it leaves you with, is like, it shows you a bunch of things. It shows you what happens when you put two human beings in a system together. It shows you what happens when, the Scoot McNairy father character is put into a clinic and like what his emotional reaction is to that scenario. And just, that's it. Like, that's all that there is. As you say, it's sort of maximalist and minimalist, where every detail is really refined, but it isn't really pitching to give you like a thesis that you walk out of the theater with and you're like, oh, okay.
Like a little movie we love called Kiki's Delivery Service.
It's so Kiki's Delivery Service, it hurts me.
And for so many different reasons too, like, you make that parallel and it's just like, there's so many things you can connect with, but the overriding thesis, I think, for like these movies and Mills as a whole, I think, is just like, the thing that you broadly take away isn't like, that message that you were sending. It's just like, it's just sort of like happening. The broad takeaway I get from it is just have empathy. Understand people. Like, basically, one of the cool things about it is that, like, I mentioned this in my review, is that like the movie very smartly, it's it's pulled back. It's from the perspective of a third party observer. You're sometimes rooted like with the kid and Joaquin, or with whatever the narrative needs to show you. It just sort of bows to that kind of whim. But then you see like basically it's constantly showing you what the other end of the phone call is, and you understand people on both sides of it, why they're saying what they're saying, and how important and meaningful it is to not just inhabit your own side of the conversation. Because like I've been where that kid is and his parents or adult figures are explaining to him a bunch of shit that like he mostly understands and wants to feel like he understands, but also knows that he doesn't and feels bad because of
He
it.
feels upset, and it's unfair that he feels upset because he didn't do anything, right?
Yes,
It's just a
it's
circumstance.
constant confusion of just like, I know that I shouldn't feel this way, but I do anyway. And it's like constantly trying to fight and reckon with that, which is, I mean, I fucking still have problems doing that today. It's just like, you know, one day you'll just be like, this thing really fucking bothers me. And I like 100% logically know that it doesn't, but I'm an emotional being and it does anyway. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing about like, you hyperfixate and then you make it into a problem. And the thing about this movie and a lot of the art this year that I've consumed that I've really connected with makes a whole lot of sense, because like last year being the dour, somber, isolating year that it was, I connected with a lot of lonely, despondent art. This year, where I'm trying to move forward from that, to take a creative endeavor forward, to do all these things with my friends and like live my life and do all this shit, I've connected with a lot more art that's like inherently more like, not exactly like happy broadly, but like affirming, where it's like The Green Knight is a movie where at the end of the day, it's critiquing all of these things about, you know, chivalry and Arthurian, Campbellian shit. And then at the very end, it's also just like, maybe this is not the thing that you should be focused on, and maybe you should like go and marry the girl who loves you and settle down and have some kids and have a fulfilling life instead. And then you have Come On here, which is also just kind of like, it's okay to exist within this, to you don't have to like to find your niche and to pursue your goal and to do it despite the fact that like, you know, the world's falling apart, the world's ending, but it's like, nothing in this movie, character conflict wise, macro conflict wise, nothing stops anybody. Nothing.
No one solves anything. No one comes up with a solution. They realize that they just have to be present in one another's lives, and that's okay. It's not your responsibility to fix things for other people. It's not their responsibility to fix things for you. You're just there. You're just existing with them. And one parallel to Kiki's Delivery Service that I really like is that movie, people think of it as being extremely comforting and nice and soft, and it is. But it gets there. It's when Miyazaki made that film, he was in one of the most nihilistic emotional periods he ever was as a writer. And the film is quite sad.
Yes, very.
It's really about like what an artist does when they lose inspiration. And that artistic element is not necessarily present in Come On, but particularly with the Phoenix character, and I think reflected in the entire family unit, is this: what do we do when we feel like we're not going to get past something? When we feel like we don't know how to move forward? And the answer is right there in the title. And that's what the fucking movie's about, is that there will always be an obstacle and you must always move forward. There will always be something wrong and you must always move forward. And that's, you know, that's the bit. And it is, as you say, it's completely affirming, but it's affirming in a way that addresses all of the hardship, that acknowledges everything that's unfair and harmful and messy and ugly about the fact that you have to
be alive.
Come on.
I mean, oh man, that fucking
it was Marriage Story-esque. If you've seen Marriage Story and you know the scene with the kid at the end, it's the same. It's the same. It's painful. Noah Baumbach, Mike Mills are war criminals, and they will be hearing from my attorneys for emotional damages done unto me in a movie theater.
I mean, it's like, and not to mention, I feel like this is only held up by those technicals that we mentioned a little while ago, is that like, I love spending time with these characters doing anything to the point where like the movie could literally substitute scenes in it with completely other scenes. And I would probably, and as long as they were made with the same technical acumen, I would have just as good of a time, which is not a negative. It just speaks to the kind of movie that this is.
Yeah.
And I love the way that like, I love spending time with these characters and I love being in these environments. Mike takes these cities that like, in all honesty, it's like if you like a lesser filmmaker showed them, they would look like fucking like capitalistic nightmare shitholes. But the way they shoot it is like ethereal and ghostly, and it's black and white, but it's also got so much like there's the black and white cinematography in this is great, is because it really is like the contrast on the black and white isn't really high. So the shades and hues of the black and white and gray really stand out. And it's like, first of all, gray area, ha 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 ha. I bet that was done on purpose. But at the same time, it feels like you're wandering through a place that like you've desaturated the color to make it easier to understand. It's like you're viewing the world through the way this kid is forced to view it in order to exist. It's just like if he views the world with color or views the world with all this detail and noise, he's going to break down and like be overstimulated. So it's like it's putting you're the ghost in the machine of the kid and of Joaquin Phoenix. Like
I love all the subtle variations in tones, especially in those segments where it does kind of give you the more city-based cinematography. It's not highly contrasted, but it's really a beautiful use of, just that full spectrum of color. And I think, as you say, like that kind of like shades of gray, where it's sort of like they look similar, but you have to understand that they're distinct. You know what I mean? You might think that this kid and this kid are the same kid. They're not. You might think that this guy, like what you're going through, is the same as what this guy's going through. It's not, because it's all kind of individualized, and it's okay to kind of understand that those things run together at distance, and when you get real close to them, they become a little bit more tricky and specific.
Oh yeah.
The one other technical element I kind of alluded to it earlier to me is that sound mix. There's a lot of use of silence. Yeah. Obviously, he's a podcaster. There's a lot of use of like audio equipment where like, the Norman character's like wearing headphones.
Yeah, he walks around with the microphone and you could hear the audio pan when he swings it.
Obviously, and then this also comes up during the interview segments where it's kind of trying to mimic what it's like to have that recording. But I really found that I love the kind of different use of audio during those segments to kind of bring you into this alien documentary space where there's music playing and, just the sound of it changes. It doesn't sound like two people having a conversation in a living room. It certainly doesn't sound like two people yelling at each other, because it's somebody trying to do a nice delivery into a microphone, so to speak. And so I thought that the use of audio was very thoughtful and purposeful, and then kind of creates these different emotional tones throughout the film to kind of complement how the scenes work to incorporate different emotional tones throughout the scenes.
It's immersive, and what that does is combined with the fact that it's already like designing you to inhabit these people, it does what Joaquin Phoenix's character takes it values so much about what he does, which is like taking this work and like solidifying it as a tangible thing that exists, as something that like, he captures it. That's the fucking the line at the end of the fucking movie, is that he says fucking like once he's reading back the tape and everything, he says fucking, I'll remind you of everything. And it's like taking the intangibility, because like all of these people have these problems that are like frustrating, and it's compartmentalizing these experiences so that they can be relived and re-experienced and reaffirmed. And that's also what the movie is to you.
Transmuted from Los Angeles to New York to New Orleans to Dallas to Kentucky, across the ocean.
It is designing itself for you to, it's doing the Ebert empathy machine thing, is that Mills feels like he's like, that's like his entire ethos. And another thing that helps,
this really kind of loose, emotional, philosophical experience and idea on tape, on film, through the lens of three-dimensional characters.
Perfect synergy.
That's filmmaking at, in my opinion, the highest level.
Absolutely.
Every movie wants to achieve this on some level. is this idea of capturing the universal and the specific, which is exactly what this movie is about, is not mistaking the universal and the specific, recognizing the specific, but also knowing that the specific exists within the universe and that everybody's like you and that everybody goes through the shit that you go through. And so you don't have to feel bad about it in terms of like guilt or shame, and that you can put forward empathy because you know that everybody else on the bus has probably yelled at their kid too, and it's all right.
Mills graduated from the school of Ingmar Bergman, in that he believes in the tangibility of art and solidifying something and using filmmaking as a means to do that, and also doing it by way of intimate character interactions that build a tapestry that, like, in isolation, it is what it is, but it's using every single element of filmmaking to synergistically elevate itself and become something that, like, is modest and doesn't have any intention of being anything other than modest. But to you, it is a profoundly emotional experience to be able to see this like manifest. And the immersive qualities that the movie has just kind of reinforce that over and over again. The sound mix definitely being one aspect. Also, we alluded to the score done by the brothers from the band The National, which I have not stopped. I've listened to the entirety of this soundtrack like 3 times a day. It's like a half an hour long, but I've listened to it like 3 times a day ever since I listened to it. It's this, and it's like, it definitely sounds like parts of the most recent National album, which, you know, that's the music video that Mike Mills made for, is that there are parts of it where it's like, oh, I hear the fucking Light Years piano right there. Or there are just these really these kind of distorted vocal tones that'll just kind of like decorate the edge of the mix here. And it's detailed to the point where it's like, yeah, I understand why you got these guys to do your soundtrack, is because they have the same philosophy in making music that you do in film, is that like everything here is simple. It's a very simple ambient listen that has like a really powerful but all-encompassing emotion in each of the songs. But it's arranged in such a way that it's just like, it's meticulous craftsmanship in the name of being formless, which, like, there are so many people that try to do that and just fucking fail. And I've seen so many movies like that where I'm just like, you were so close. You were so close, and you just fucking tripped at the very end.
I think it's extremely difficult. And I think a good place to bring this to our conclusion is this. We've been kind of talking about the modestness and the simplicity. And I think that the quality of this film that is so important, that all of these technical elements support its character. And that's why it's modest, and that's why it's quiet, is because I think that you and I would both agree that in terms of maybe not necessarily film, but in terms of narrative and storytelling, there is no element more important than the character, and there is no element more modest than the character. Character is delicate because people are delicate, and people are modest, and people are multitude. There are billions of people in the world, and they're all idiosyncratic and unique, but it means that everything about this movie is defined by the 4 characters and really the 2 characters that make it up. And that's why it's humble and yet expansive, is because the characters are humble and expansive. Every scene, every element. The reason you could watch an entire reshuffling of these scenes is because you would be watching the same intensely detailed, realized, and lived in characters interacting with each other in a million scenarios. It's a movie that could be 10 hours long. It could be an entire series, because if every element of it was written and directed with the same level of care as this, I would gladly watch Woody Norman and Gabby Hoffman as mother and son in a sequel dealing with him in high school and just doing some stuff. I don't even like, the plot could be about him wanting to start a podcast because it's, you know, whatever. You could write 14 of these, and I'm not sure I would get tired of it, because as long as you write the characters this well, it's gold. It's gold.
That's the wonder of it, is that I think what truly unlocked my deep appreciation for it is that, like, I watch film primarily speaking because I like being immersed in a world, an environment, a time. I like being immersed in the vision of somebody else, in the world of somebody else. And the amazing thing is that not does this immerse me in it, but it immerses me in this world that makes me want to immerse myself in the world that I live in, because it's the same world. And like it's like when I fucking watch Lord of the Rings, and it's just like, dude, I want to be in the Hobbit village. This looks dope as fuck. And then this is like, hey, what if you felt the level of immersion that you do and all these other things that you love, but it's like you could just go outside, and it's just like, I've never felt this level of life affirming in a movie before.
They're not that disconnected, because if you put the pieces together, what Come On will tell you is that this is the world where they made the Lord of the Rings. Yes. So if you want to go live in the real world, you could go make Lord of the Rings somewhere, right? Like, you could go do anything you want to do because the world is expansive. And that's the answer, kids, to what the future is like. It's whatever the fuck you want it to be. It's whatever we make it into. And that's beautiful and optimistic and affirming. And, you know, who knows where we're going to be in 10 years, but I'll probably still be watching this film because it really left an impression on me. And I'm really glad, Jake, that we got the chance to talk about it, because, oh boy, you know, I saw this in theaters, and when I left, I was crying, and I had the snot running into the mustache and the beard. I was like passing families on their way to see Encanto, going to the bathroom. I was
but you're Kristen Stewart in Spencer.
I literally just going down the hallway, Claire shooting Johnny Greenwood.
I completely share that sentiment. I had to, like, obviously it's like my girlfriend and I and like one other person were the only people in the theater, and there were moments, and what I love about it too is that they're just very brief moments, but you're just kind of like and then like I'll just be like, the waterworks will start and be like, nope, like, because I left it and I was just like, I don't like feel one way. I feel like, I mean, the movies aren't comparable, but it's like the last time I felt like that's when I left Blade Runner 2049, and I walked and I was just like looking at the world, and I was just like,
yeah,
everything is different now. Oh my God. And this is just a movie. It's just a movie about a dude. It's not like a big action sci-fi epic or anything. And those are awesome. We talked about Dune this year. But this is why I love stories and like art and shit. And it distills that so purely. So like, you know, it speaks to us and people like us. So if you haven't gotten the opportunity to see this movie, or if it's not playing near you, or like whatever, or if you haven't even heard
VOD on December 23rd.
Yeah, if you are the type of person who watches this podcast and wants to listen to what Zach and I have to say about it, congratulations, you're in the demographic to love this movie.
You are.
And more people, like, it's doing well critically, and like people are seeing it, but it's getting buried under the Licorice Pizzas and West Side Stories.
Currently, and they just announced today, it is currently the highest rated A24 film on Letterboxd.
Not an easy task.
No. So we'll see where it ends up. Curious to see where it'll be kind of come award season. If anybody but Phoenix has a shot, I would think it'd be the Desners for the score. Maybe notes for direction, maybe notes for screenplay. We'll see.
Maybe.
But I think that pretty well wraps us up on this movie. So Jake, I got one thing. So this is leading in. So this Thursday, my friend James and I are going to be talking about our top 5 favorite Steven Spielberg movies. Jake, what's your favorite Steven Spielberg movie?
As of right now, complicated question, just because the love of film was born with Mr. Steven Spielberg back when I was my autistic hyperfixation as a child was dinosaurs. So naturally, I watched all 3 Jurassic Park movies. One was always my favorite, and you know, the John Williams score, the Spielberg direction, the incredibly charismatic cast. I love every single thing about that movie and how it works together. It's that synergy of like everything isolated in that movie is good, but everything with everything else is great. And it creates this amazing, fantastical fucking like story that's like, it's tense. It's got like a, you know, it's a message about humanity's willingness or unwillingness to go beyond their means, and the dangers of ambition. And like, it works on so many different levels. It's an infinitely watchable movie, a beautiful film. Love everything about it. I don't think it's my favorite Spielberg movie. If I had to, if I had to like compartmentalize what's the best one or what's the most perfect one, I don't really know what my answer would be. Maybe it is my favorite, but if I had to say, like, if I had to like pick, if it's just like what movie is like what's the dart gonna land on? Like, what's the biggest section? Like, what do you see your best chances of being? Is that like, you know, Mr. Spielberg has a lot of movies and a lot of different eras of filmmaking, but I think I have a particular soft spot for his 90s and 2000s material, which is kind of overlooked by a lot of people. So part of me wants to say that it's the film Munich. I just haven't seen that film in a while, but I remember being so impressed by the atmosphere, the tone, and the kind of dread that every second of that movie is imbued with. I remember the opening sequence being genuinely maybe the most harrowing thing Spielberg's ever directed, and the rest of the movie really isn't far behind, with fucking the cinematography just bam, 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 consistently just the best thing you've ever seen. But I don't really know. So honestly, my answer right now is Raiders of the Lost Ark, because that's the perfect film.
We will be talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark, Munich, and Jurassic Park. That'll be over on the First Watch podcast channel, so please check it out when that drops.
Fuck yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jake. Thank you, everybody, for checking out this episode. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah.